Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to start a little bit. We'll let people come in a little bit and get started. So welcome and take a couple minutes to get yourself set. In the meantime, if you're here, if you could put, maybe in the chat where your organization you're with and where you're sitting right now, what geography. On the stage here, we have people sitting in Florida, and Los Angeles, and Rhode Island, gentlemen joining us from Chicago. And then we got here in Washington, D.C. So we're all over the place here, curious to see where you're sitting far and around the world. So take a time. We'll probably get started here in a couple more minutes, probably about 11:03, 11:04, let people to get in.
Also, I don't know if anyone can hear this background noise. Can anyone hear that? There's like someone mowing a lawn.
Yeah,
No?
I can.
Great. Oh, that bird, yeah. Well, I'll just keep myself on mute just in case.
Hello, everyone. We're taking time to get set. Thank you. I see now people are putting in the chat where they're sitting and organization. This is great. Thank you so much. Give us a couple more minutes and then we'll get started. Happy Friday, everyone.
Happy Friday.
Hey, how you doing there? It's a familiar voice. Good seeing you.
You don't understand the amount of running I did just to get here. The traffic was horrendous. So I'm quite out of breath. So good morning.
Well, hopefully this will take your breath away. I had to do that. You let it there. Sorry, Gary. Good seeing you.
Good to see you, Gary.
Good to see you, Ava. Hi, Peter. Hi, Vivian.
Hello.
We're letting everybody come in a little bit. It's everywhere they're from. We got Vancouver. We have, my gosh, Seattle. This is great. We have Chicago, of course. Another Chicago. New York City representing. Fantastic. Very good. France, Thailand, here we go. Look at this. It's a global conversation here. Wonderful to see. Thank you, everyone. Welcome. Denver, good to see. Wow. Of New York City. Hi, Kristen. More New York City. Guess it kind of makes sense, right? Circular City Week, New York City. Next year, we have to do this in person. Seattle. All right. Well, I think we have a quorum here. I think we can get going here. So without further ado, welcome everybody to our panel today and taking your time out on your Friday to join us during the last or the closing day of Circular City Week, at least for the Inclusive Circular City Symposium. First and foremost, I want to thank the Circular City Week organizing committee for putting this event on. It's amazing to see when this started a couple years ago of how big this has become, its global reach and the conversations that are being ignited on this conversation. And also, I want to thank first and foremost the organizations representing this panel. And the people on this panel, the Inclusive Circular City Symposium launched this week, and all of you, thank you for helping and curating, over 14 events on 5 continents, kind of a hectic day or hectic week. So thank you for that. Appreciate it. On that note, we're wrapping this up though today with, I think, a really important conversation that we want to have. I think an intimate conversation about the world's current state. And really want to make sure that we can summarize the learnings that we've taken from this and really bring in the best and the brightest of the private and social sector to kind of lend their insights and knowledge of what the circular city transition looks like. And so on that note, we put into the chat, you'll see some of the learning outcomes that we want to focus on today. Make no mistake, this is about circular cities, but we want to take a second and really talk about the current state, to take a 30,000-foot view before we dive into what a circular city looks like. The need and address the need for what the transition to a circular economy should be. So during this journey today, we're going to have a candid, I would hope, a refreshing discussion of organizations here who've been working collectively together over the past 2 years with a common theory of change of transitioning to a regenerative and equitable circular city and economic platform. So here you have representing today, you have NL North America, a multinational representing the energy sector. You have Reaply, an upstream circular business startup. You have 2 INGOs, one metabolic and the great work that they're doing. And I should not just put metabolic in an INGO. They represent many type of groups here, but a leader in the circular economy, think tank space and implementation space. And then a really unique social enterprise. I think one of the key insights that we want to share today a little bit is that collaboration and how our organizations have been working together in so many unique markets, partnering on really representing regenerative and representing inclusivity in the work that we're doing. So we're going to talk about that. So before we begin on the questions, I think we'd rather start again framing a little bit right now of the world in the current state. So our current extractive take, make, waste model is not currently designed to incentivize regeneration nor equity inclusion. I mean, I think that's the reality that we're living in today. As much as we want to talk about that, the facts, the numbers, the figures just don't add up. You know, I think there's something fundamentally wrong in the world when an extractive oil company is making record profits during a war in which the aggressor is being financially supported by fossil fuel revenues, while simultaneously the world is dealing with a climate crisis predominantly caused by that same industry. I think we've gotten a little bit numb. I think for the reasons that we need to jump up and down and celebrate the wins, I think many of the times we're not focusing on the root problem. We're just addressing some of the symptoms on the periphery. And what we want to do today is dig in a little bit and have a discussion about that root cause and solutions of how we can solve a lot of the world's problems together in the cities we're living in. And so what I want to do is start out with 2 facts. One, of the circularity gap report, our world is only 8.6% circular, which is down from 9.1% in 2019. That says a lot. All of us on this call are saying, yes, sustainability, we're moving forward. Look at the rise of ESG, circular economy, yay. Yet we're not gaining, we're losing traction. And number 2, a little bit of data, which I want to highlight, and we're going to talk a little bit about recycling. According to the last Beach Cleanup and Beyond Plastics report, only 5% of plastics is recycled, with about 85% of plastic ending up in landfills, with 10% being incinerated in the United States. That just came out yesterday, and we'll put these figures in there. So I think when you start off looking at this, you cannot solve a problem until we recognize collectively there is a problem. And so again, I want to stay aspirational on solutions, but I think what we need to find out is we know what the problems are. And so what I want to do now is hand the conversation, the mic over to our esteemed panelists. All these people are doing amazing work in the circular economy, sustainability, and business profit-making space. And I want to hand it off to them for them to briefly provide a quick introduction of what they're doing, what their role is in the space, and a data point for them that they find interesting that they want to actively solve individually within their groups, but also collectively as a team. And before I hand over, I just want to say one quick thing. My name's John Holm. I'm Vice President of Pixera Global, Strategic Initiatives at Pixera Global, leading our circular economy engagements. And I'm just so excited now to hand it over to my friends here that I almost lost track of that. So let's just transition over. And first, Eva, I want to come to you. Eva Glodek, CEO of Metabolic. Can you provide a quick introduction and a data point that you want to bring to everyone to talk about of why we're here in this conversation and meeting to find solutions?
All right, great. Thanks, John. So I'm Eva Glodek. I'm the founder and CEO of Metabolic, which is a systems change ecosystem. So as John alluded to, it's not one organization, it's actually many. We have 5 main organizations at the core, and surrounded by that in orbit are the different specific ventures that we've been generating. So it's like a systems change infrastructure for driving forward a circular, regenerative, equitable economy. And that is our overall mission. So we do advisory work, we develop software, we do research, all sorts of different activities. And a big part of our focus is on cities and how important they are in the overall transition to a sustainable, regenerative, equitable society. So we have a large cities team, and we've been partnering with the groups, with all the companies represented here for a while now, on driving forward a new model for how cities can really be transitioned to a circular economy. And I'm going to get into all of that. And I guess there's a ton of facts that I would love to share today, but maybe one that's relevant is to also consider, there's a lot of focus on climate change and how critical it is and what a huge crisis we're facing. And that's absolutely true. But unless we actually move to a circular economy, we will not be able to tackle climate change either. And that's for a few reasons. But one of them is that actually the embodied emissions, the amount of energy that goes into producing products is so high that people have estimated that between 30 and 70% of our carbon emissions would disappear if we actually closed those loops and went to a circular model. And that means that without going circular, we won't be able to achieve that 30 to 70% reduction. And that means that we won't be able to decarbonize without a circular economy. So that's one piece of food for thought. Who should I pass to, John?
Well, I think real quickly, I'll pass, and that's wonderful. Great baton. I think I want to go to Gary here. They have a great stat, and I love what you brought out there. So again, circular, focusing on solving climate, solving emissions. I think this is a common theme of this is not a linear. It's not a binary. It's a different conversation, right?
I guess one of the things that I'm always trying to hammer on is that it's all interconnected, that it's all a big system, that we can't just say like, okay, we're focusing on energy or we're focusing on water or materials. So, and that's a big part of what we're trying to talk about today too, right? That like, it's all one big system. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Gary, I want to come to you real quickly.
Yes.
Because it's just a highlight. We've been jamming together for over 2 years, and you're like blowing up. And I think what we've always loved about seeing with Reaply and the great work that you're doing is, representing upstream positive, positive upstream profitable business models in circular, which is many times seen as an oxymoron. And I think there's a lot of things that you bring into the space that we just love, your energy, your enthusiasm, but also your science-based approach of how you look at upstream and your science-based approach of how you think systemically, which more the world needs. Can you provide a quick introduction of what you do in this space, and then a data point that you want to bring to the team that you think, or the audience that you think is powerful, that we're discussing with our work collectively together within our coalition?
Yes, and thanks for the invite. And these are all my friends and all the people who I read and look up to. So I'm very excited to be a part of this conversation. So yeah, I'm Gary. I'm CEO and co-founder of Reaply. Reaply is a technology company that's trying to help organizations with circularity, starting with reuse. So we build technology to help organizations with reuse kind of versus recycling. And then when they no longer need physical resources within their company, we try to find happy homes for them that aren't incineration or landfill. And so that's kind of what Reaply does, kind of in a nutshell. My stat, I have many, just like Ava, I have many ones that I could talk, but I have it here prepared. It's actually on the background of my computer. And that is, if we just double where we are from a global circularity perspective, so we're currently around 8.6%, if we just got to 17%, that would lead to 39% reduction in global greenhouse gas emissions. So when I think of all of the things that we all should be doing to get to abating the effects of the 2040 and 2050 scenarios because of climate change, one of the most tractable ones is actually just growing the circular economy. And the really cool thing about that is not just the climate end, the economic end. Because if we're able to grow the circular economy, that means more people who are left out of the linear economy come into our economy. And so really excited to talk about that more today.
Oh man, thank you, Gary. This is always geeking me up right now. I'm excited because we're going to get into some really, really good stuff here. So thank you, sir. And now, Peter, I'm going to save you a little bit after Viv for a second. So I want to have a deeper discussion on energy, but I want to go to Viv. Vivian, Luke, man, we've been doing work, Alaska, Montana, Ghana, looking to do stuff in India. And one thing we love about First Mile and the work you're doing, similar with Ava, you're kind of a hybrid organization. But man, you've been working at that intersection of equity and inclusion for like 10 years with the informal sector, doing some amazing work on the ground and really taking the pulse on the ground of what people need in a circular context, not just looking at packaging and looking at recycling, but really looking at human lives and livelihoods about how they're being affected by waste streams and climate. So turning over to you, provide a quick introduction, and then what I would love to get some context from you, if you can provide a quick data point on also is equity, a little bit of equity and a little bit of how inclusion plays a role in this conversation. And thanks for coming.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, John. And it's great to be here with you all today. This is truly an esteemed panel, and I'm just humbled to be a part of it. So I'm Vivian Luke. I'm the executive director at WORK. WORK is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to end poverty through good, dignified jobs. We have an initiative that we started with our sister company Thread called the First Mile, where we work at the very first mile of material supply chains. We support informal waste collectors globally to procure and reduce the amount of waste that's in the environment and put it back into reuse. And, I think that when we're talking about equity and inclusion and even just recycling and, the trend of the sheer amount of conversations around recycling, reuse, reduction today, I want to just be very clear that the informal sector has been doing this for decades. They have been at the very forefront of the circular economy at the start of this for many, many years without very many resources. They've been doing this to put food on the table for their families, to ensure that there's a roof over their heads, to ensure that we are leaving the world better than we have left it, we started. So, I want to just emphasize that, when we're thinking about the circular economy, we have to think about the people who are involved and who have been involved from the very first day live. And, if the one stack that I will share today is that the job creation potential for inclusive recycling systems is estimated to be on average 321 jobs per 10,000 tons per year of recyclables. And now, I know I'm focusing a lot on recyclables and a lot on the informal sector who are collecting recyclable materials, but make no mistake that, what they want is that they're able to collect all the materials that are out there. Right now, it's very, very limited, and it's very, very limited to the amount of money that they can make as well. And if we actually would engage them in the process of redesign, they will tell us exactly how to redesign a bottle, exactly how to redesign the waste that's out there that they're collecting every day so that it could be fully recyclable, and to let you know exactly where that recyclability leverage exists within their communities and from the entirety of that supply chain as well. So I'm just excited to be here, to be able to share their knowledge, and make no mistake about it, it is their knowledge that I'm sharing today.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Thanks for bringing up that highlight. It is their knowledge, and you are representing that. And I think many times in our work, we always feel like we get the privilege of representing many times what's really happening on the ground. And I think it's almost our obligation that we need to actually work collectively to kind of help lead that transition on behalf to a degree. And I think it's wonderful just to be in this room with you folks. Peter, so we had a startup, we have these hybrid organizations. You have us that, convenes and works deeply with the private sector on transitioning to the state. And then there's you and NL, this multinational working on renewable energy and scaling it. Can you give a little bit of context, sir, of your role in the inclusive circular economy space? And I remember us geeking out 2 years ago and like, oh, inclusive circular economy, like we actually knew what that meant and we could describe it without it just being a marketing term. Can you talk a little bit about what that means to you and NL, and then just give a stat that you think is really important that the whole world needs to see of why you're involved in our coalition and why you're involved on systems change?
Sure. So thank you again for having us, and John, you and the entire Pixera team for putting together a fantastic run of show for the entire week, and Danish Clean Tech Hub as well for all the support. I feel very fortunate to be here, as Viv said, and let me just share a little bit about Enel. Enel is, for those of you in North America, I often say Enel is one of the largest companies you've probably never heard of. Our global headquarters is based in Rome. We have roughly 65,000 employees, 70 million customers, and we are the largest producers of renewable energy in the world based on installed capacity. In many parts of the world, we also have enough transmission and distribution lines to run from the Earth to the moon 4 times. But in North America, we're not necessarily a household name. We're an independent power producer, and we have three business lines. One is our NL Green Power North America group, which has about 6 or 7 gigawatts of installed capacity. We have NLX, which focuses more on digitization, decarbonization, electrification. And then we have energy and commodity management. And that business line used to be known as NL Trading. But a few years ago now, we purposefully renamed it Energy and Commodity Management. And I think the reason why is because the commodities associated with the energy industry in the past century are not the same commodities associated with the energy industry for this century. And for us, circularity is core to our purpose. Our purpose is open power for a brighter future. We full-throatedly support the just transition for the energy sector, which touches on issues of equity, inclusion, addressing challenges in job transitions, addressing challenges in environmental and social justice. And so I work to foster that in North America every day, as do all of my peers. And I want to touch on, I got my stat for you, but I want to touch on just a couple of things that Eva and Gary teased out already. Eva, you mentioned how, these are complex systems and everything is interconnected. And I believe, I heard this from John Englander, who's with the International Sea Institute, Sea Level Institute several years ago. Climate change is not specific enough. We have energy issues and GHG emissions issues. We have water, weather, temperature changes. And then there's the ecology associated with that and its impact on society in terms of disease, in terms of food. And then there's rising sea levels on top of that. And so, I hope we can dig into that and sort of peel apart the complexity of how we can address that holistically. But one stat that I wanted to throw out was in 2021, the CDP, formerly known as the Carbon Disclosure Project, found that scope 3 emissions are on average 11.4 times larger than an organization's scope 1 or scope 2 emissions, which is associated with your operations. And so inherently, we have to look upstream and downstream in our value chain and engage with partners across industries. We obviously are a producer of renewables, which is an upstream supply to organizations into cities. But we have to look at procurement decisions. We have to look at second life opportunities like Repley is offering. And one other stat I'll throw out there, John, is Gary, you mentioned that the economic ends in performance that's possible. Accenture found a couple years ago that for the electricity industry alone, there is $500 billion of value at risk in this decade if we do not take care, if we do not address the circular economy opportunities that we have. And so I'll leave that there, John, and let you keep it moving.
No, thank you for that. I mean, we can really dive down the rabbit hole on all of this all the time. I think the one thing I want to highlight here, though, a couple of threads here is, we see a lot in the space where everything, when we go to circuits and we see speaking engagements, it's all about recycling or sustainable packaging. Ad nauseum. If we always say recycling should be the last thing, and we see business models here that are profitable. So what is happening right now in the space to where we can shift the conversation to get private sector or to get startups to focus on profitable business models that are regenerative and upstream? What can we do to actually jump up and down to make this transition happen to where the problem is not on the symptoms, the problem is the root? What can we do? And I think I'll turn to Gary first, and then I'm going to go to Eva on this one. Why, first of all, do you think we're having this conversation all the time about recycling? And I think it's important to ask the why. Recycling and sustainable packaging, and you see all these hundreds of millions of dollars for private equity groups saying, yes, we're creating a new bag. Mm-hmm. And then two, from that, how do we change that conversation to have more repleys or to have more metabolics or to have more NLs to where there's profit coming in, but we're not focusing on it? So first to you, Gary, and then to you, Eva.
Such a good question, and I hope I don't alienate anyone listening with my answer, but it turns out that the linear economy is really easy to do. It's really, really easy. We've literally built up our entire economic system to run to a landfill. So if you were to ask a corporate C-suite executive, hey, let's figure out a circular business model, well, that's hard. That's really hard. That requires change. That requires an investment. And sometimes that requires us getting things wrong before we get them right. Meaning we have to experiment. We have to try things that that don't have a 5-year plan behind them. So I think a little bit is there's an inertia of transitioning from where we are to where we need to go. The other part of it, I think, and kind of the why is it's really easy to just throw something in a bin that's colored and then assume that someone that you don't see is doing something with it. That is just a projection of responsibility. If we are taking something and we're consuming something as a human, if we're consuming something as a business, if we're consuming something as an OEM or as a supplier or manufacturer, we must be responsible for what happens to those materials after we're done using or done consuming them if we're not consuming them completely. So like the shifting of responsibility is really good, and shifting it to a blue bucket, and then a guy with a truck comes and does something magical with it. So I think there's inertia, and I think there's just kind of like lack of owning the problem that's kind of symptomatic to why we are where we are. I think the way we need to go is get away from incrementalism. Hey, your 5-year plan about increasing recycling rates from 5 to 10% ain't working, and is not going to get us to where we need to be by the end of this decade, 2030. So I hope, not just for Reaply, for the folks here on this call, for other entrepreneurs who are trying to grow companies and thinking about starting one, that people in the boardrooms give these companies a shot to help innovate and elevate and evolve their business model into one that could be more circular. We need to be taking all shots on goals and not thinking about like what incrementally can we do, because the problem at hand is exponentially growing.
Yeah, and I think it's almost real quickly on that one. It's like the data points, the data we're aspiring to for success, what we all aspire to success, especially when I look at the sustainability field that we work in. The low bar that we have of how we pat ourselves on the back for a pledge, it's mind-boggling sometimes, because all of us are desperate to say, look, we did something. And I understand that. I'm not disparaging that need of human behavior of saying, this is amazing, but we got to raise the bar for the world to really start moving. I want to move really quickly now, Eva, because a lot of the work that you're doing and what you always aspire to is around degrowth, upstream, et cetera. What are your insights on this question? I want to hand it off to you and get your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, John, and thanks for those great insights, Gary. So we recently did an analysis of actually how funding was flowing in the Netherlands toward circular initiatives, because we also had this, we've been working on the circular economy and accelerating it for a decade, over a decade now, and wondering, okay, so what is actually stopping this from really picking up? What are the real barriers for actually seeing systems change? And when you look at the pattern of how money is flowing toward circular initiatives, you can see that actually most of it is flowing toward lower R type projects. So recovery of material into energy, which should not even be called recycling. That's just destruction of complexity. Then recycling on top of that, which is actually really at the bottom of that pyramid. And all of the higher R elements like regenerative solutions or rethinking things, actually imagining, can we provide this service without a physical product at all? Or can we come up with creative reuse solutions, or really figure out how to create regenerative materials that get put into the system and keep that loop permanently closed through biological systems, et cetera. There's all these other strategies that are not getting any investment because they're too risky. Because like Gary said, everything's been designed around the linear economy and everything, and it's very easy to do that. Now, another stat that I wanted to potentially mention earlier that I decided to talk about the climate change one, but if I'd known that Gary was going to say something similar, I would have said the other thing. But it's shocking to understand that an estimated 99% of materials that enter into North America as consumer products end up as waste in just 6 months. So the speed of this entire chain, we've designed a single-use economy that is also very material dependent to generate these services and goods. Now, if we actually were to move toward a different economy, toward one where we're conserving those resources, where we're getting the most out of each piece of material, then actually things would start to become very restructured, because it's no longer about infinite growth and infinite throughput. It's actually, we're looking at a more steady state model where you're actually not trying to sell as much as possible, as quickly as possible, so that you just move on and move on. And that's really getting to that root problem, where we actually have to be, the circular economy is not necessarily this kind of growth economy that we've created. It's actually much more compatible with a steady state economy that's generating value and increasing the value that it's sharing with everyone, rather than generating straight up throughput. And that requires rethinking models. It's an evolution of capitalism. It's not like throwing out capitalism, because there's lots of great things about it. The logic of markets is amazing. There's all sorts of great things that capitalist systems do. But the model that we have right now is this runaway pirate capitalism that is not compatible with the finite resources that we have on this planet. So I think we need to start looking at that and really and that gets into, I think, what we're going to talk about a bit later, like novel financing mechanisms. So how do we actually create financing systems that don't, because there's reasons why all the money is going to these lower R strategies, because the return on investment is really clear and really straightforward and fast. And if you want to get into more complex things where you're talking about complex reuse systems and leasing systems and even service, switching from product to service, that gets more dodgy and risky, and you don't have as high a return, like a faster return on investment. So you need different financing models that allow for this. And that's a bigger kettle of fish that I hope we get into.
And we will. I mean, 45 minutes to type this conversation, but we're going to get there. We have 45 minutes left, and I want to be clear. The chat is blowing up, and so please note, put your questions in. If we're going to have a Q&A, we're going to try to get to you. If we don't, we're going to answer them. We're going to come back to you. But I want to really now take both of that sound bites, and it's really funny when we talk about, Gary, you mentioned linear, easier, systems, harder. I mean, I love that. Like, makes sense. A lot of what we see in the Green Deal is you see incentivization of product as a service models and regenerative models. Policy is really interesting, where policy plays such an important and impactful role. And we're going to dive into that a little bit with our circular city discussion of how we can work in cities. But I just want to bring up a quick point on that, is that without policy and the enforcement of policy, not just policy, the enforcement of said policy, this transition is not going to happen at the pace we need. And so when you look at those ways to spur the transition, we always need to be thinking in that space too. Peter, I want to really come to you for a second. We've been all working together 2+ years, and we all have this common theory of change, that we want the world to transition to a regenerative and equitable state where, in a perfect world, those historically marginalized communities in which we work in take ownership of those upstream business models. And so when we're looking at that, I want to unpack a little bit the definition of regeneration, because that word has so much, I would say, different meanings in the space, just like circular economy does. What does regeneration mean to NL? And I want to preface this by saying that I want you to talk a little bit, as you're kind of a North Star in the space, Peter, provide a little bit of context of NL's internal mechanisms of how you don't greenwash this term, and the investments you've made into the company to be your version of what regeneration is. So what is reversion to regeneration? What's your definition? And how do you walk that talk to really make it real? And Vivian, I'm coming to you after this.
Sure. I'm not sure I could quickly, give you a one-liner on that, but really
Sure.
think about regeneration. I think of it sort of in the context of our ethos of creating shared value. We own large infrastructure assets, and therefore we existed within communities for multiple decades, right? And so we have to work with those communities to solve challenges that they're having, and we take our environmental responsibility very seriously. Our engineering department has an environmental archaeology and biodiversity group within it, and that's simply because we want to make sure that the social and environmental impacts are being addressed. I read a statistic recently that 90% of biodiversity loss is caused by the way that we extract, process materials, fuels, and food. Okay, 90% of biodiversity loss is associated with that. And Citra found that making better use of 4 materials in the EU would cut the trip to net zero in half. And so, we look upstream in terms of new innovative solutions, bio-based solutions for the assets and equipment that we're purchasing. We have a bit of a carrot stick model with our suppliers in terms of requesting LCAs and EPDs and more bio-based materials. And we incentivize them from a commercial perspective to do that. But then in our operations is really where I think it has the biggest impact, because renewables take up a large amount of land space, and we want to leave that land in as good, if not preferably better condition than when we receive it. And so we work with landowners, we have long-term leases. We perform that social, environmental, and economic contextual analysis, but we also are doing long-term climate change risk assessments prior to any project even being approved. And we bake in circularity metrics into our asset reviews by the investment committee. And so we have models like dual use solar, where we want to provide ecosystem services, planting native vegetation that has deep root structures that helps retain groundwater and stop soil erosion. We could introduce pollinators or agrivoltaics, so that there's actually raising agricultural crops on this land, and really making sure that the land is provided back to those landowners and those communities with job opportunities attached, as good or better than when it started. And what we're seeing in the industry is it's actually really accelerating now, that we're starting to get good measurement and monitoring and verification on the actual performance of these practices. And we've got tests throughout the world, many different countries. And we're really excited about it, because it's providing opportunities, and it's restoring that habitat that we know is vital to win this battle.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Peter. That's a lot. I know that's not fair to give you that question and then talk about how you put it inside. So thank you for digesting that. You're hating me right now. And I'm going to do it. I'm going to get a Viv. Viv. All right. So I'm laughing just because it is hard to do, because it's massive. But we do talk about about inclusivity. And, when we're trying to work in Alaska and trying to gain the trust of tribal, and the work we've done with Salish Kootenai in Montana and trying to get trust, and then the work in Ghana on the ground. Can you give us your definition of what equity means in your lens? And then two, give us a hardcore example of something that you can describe on the circular journey where you're representing those voices and you've seen change happen, that can give something a little bit aspirational to kind of go, okay, we get it, and this helps. I'm gonna put you on the spot here and go.
Yeah, I think, equity for us, we talk a lot about options, choice, and agency, and providing those to the people who are involved. And, when our collectors and our families, so our work started in Haiti, so I'll share some examples from Haiti as well. But, when they are resorted to buying water just from little sachets, because that's all they can afford for that day, and they can't afford any further systems beyond that, that leads to a lot of waste on the grounds that they don't want to leave either. That's not what they want to do in this world either, right? But that's the only option that they have. And so how can we enable more options and choices, and enable an economy that doesn't just take from them, but gives back to them as well, so that they can be a part of that solution and be a part of having an agency and choice to choose something else. I'll share another example from Alaska, and John, we were on this trip together talking with communities who are sharing with us the type of waste that is being generated. And we asked them, well, what in the last few years, what's been the largest amount of waste that you've seen? And they told us that it was Amazon boxes and packaging. And it's because Amazon can do prime deliveries to places that you can't even get to in a car in a day. And, that's ridiculous. It's insane. And, for those individuals to not be a part of this solution, and Peter, I love what you said about leaving the land with opportunities attached and restoring those habitat. That's what we need to do with these communities. And because they know how to do that. That's how they've lived for many, many years, right?
Yeah.
And now we've taken so much away from them, and what we're giving back to them is the solution in the form of Amazon Prime. That's not okay. That is not okay at all. How can we involve them in these solutions? How can we bring two sides together, multiple sides together, right? And like, Gary, I'm sitting here this whole time thinking Reaply should be a solution at every brand. Like that should be an option that they should know about this. And I'm going to make sure that every brand we talk to knows about you. But, like we have to provide those options and those choices and allow individuals the agency to make those choices.
Thank you for that, Viv. Thank you for actually providing the detailed color and context. I mean, I still think it's amazing that getting one container doesn't matter what's in it. One container of waste out of Travel Lane, Alaska is $100,000 because there's no infrastructure and the waste just goes into the ground while permafrost is melting and climate change is happening on the shorelines. So thank you for providing that color. I want to transition now, and I was thinking, 2 years ago, Eva and Gary, we were on a panel talking about circular cities. And, we were really addressing 2 years ago this role of being larger than just recycling and packaging. I think it's the same conversation to a degree, but we're talking then about inclusion. And I remember, Gary, one of the conversations that really struck a chord in that was, only on venture capital funding, only 2% of venture capital funding goes to Black and brown communities. And I think when we start looking at racism, outright racism, outright ownership really going to white people, it really struck a chord in circular because a lot of the communities in which we're operating in, and now we're transitioning everyone to cities, especially in the cities around the world, those communities on the ground, the indigenous, the historically marginalized, are the ones that have been doing reuse and reduce and repurpose to live. So when we see Patagonia coming in and saying, let's repurpose in a repair workshop, that is good. But also let's not take for a second the stock when you see pawn shops and you see shoe repair shops and you see all these shops on the ground, yet, oh my God, I don't want to go there. That stigma. Can you talk a little bit, because we're going to dive in now to the city work, and we're going to go to you, Gary, first, and then we're going to go to Ava, and Ava, where Metabolic has done some amazing work in the space with circular cities. But Gary, first on you. What's an example of what you've seen work well now with this talk of circular cities coming into play and working in a city? What example can you share of something that gives you hope of thinking that there is this thing of a circular city that can happen?
Yes. So this is actually a very personal portion of this whole conversation to me, not just because of my own racial background, but in the city of Chicago, where I live and where our company is. So I think any state actor, any municipality leader, any state leader, any federal leader who's not thinking about circular cities and how to operationalize them is really missing the boat for the low income and no income portions of their city, not just from a sustainability climate change perspective, or just from a flat economic development perspective. Where we said there's been scientific papers that have been published now that shows that in cities, I think there's a very famous example with Ben & Jerry's, that in cities where more established firms share equipment with small business owners who are less established, you actually grow the pie, grow the economic pie in that city. Where have we seen it even in our own case here in Chicago with Reaply? We've been able to see universities who might have equipment, or back in COVID, who might have PPE that they no longer need for laboratory experiments, that can donate those to the Chicago public school systems for teachers or for students who are at home and doing at-home learning, or for nonprofits on the south side of Chicago who need them because they were all gone from Amazon, they were all gone from Walgreens and our local pharmacies. So there are little tea leaves if you look, that are all around us. What we actually need, in my mind, is, yes, a company like Reaply and others to build a technology infrastructure to connect us all so that we can be sharing these resources and that there's more local material flow. But I think importantly, you need leadership at the public level. You need folks to understand that this is a critical element for us to get out of COVID from an economic development perspective, but to actually bring about a real green economy to where people are going to be living in the new world. A stat that I like to think about here is that in in order for us to urbanize the way that we'll have to because of climate migration, there's going to be, I think, something like 2.4 trillion square feet of buildings that need to be built each month for the next 40 years. So just think about that impact to a city, both from a materials perspective and where it's going. So we're building up cities to have infrastructure for who? And my hope is that who isn't just people like me, the affluent, it's for people who are in the low income and no income parts of our city. And I really think that the circular model is the best way to transition us from where we are to where we should be.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you for providing the color and sharing your story. I want to transition now a little bit, and before I hand it off to Eva, just to provide some context. This is Circular City Week, and one thing that we're doing with all of our groups together here, we're going to talk a little later, is the idea of partnering together, like-minded partnerships to help solve this problem of the circular transition. And all of us have come together to form a coalition, the Circular City Coalition, all of our organizations. And I'm just throwing this out there in case you leave earlier. If you're interested in participating, learning more about what we're trying to do here, stay tuned. Go to circularcitycoalition.com. You can learn more here on an announcement on May 18th. That's a little plug to get to the conversation now of cities. Talked a little bit about the state of play. We talked about these statistics and talked about root cause. And about, one thing that, we've been partnering 2 years now and working, we've had the ability now to kind of partner and work with you in the cities and some of your amazing city work. I mean, I'm just going to name a couple cities and governments that you've already worked with on the circular transition really before anybody started getting out there. Charlotte, Boulder, government of Netherlands, Amsterdam, Warsaw. The list goes on, and I know we're doing work in Cleveland and Cambridge, Massachusetts together. When you see the mess that we have in the world, everybody's looking for a solution. Everybody wants a solution. Everybody on this call, everybody who's attending this definitely does not want to sit and understands the data points. So let's talk about solutions now and get a little bit scientifically aspirational, and that is not an oxymoron. Why cities, Eva? Why should we start in cities? How can we look at cities as a beacon of hope? And please shed some light on what you think cities are that beacon for hope. And then also an insight on what we need, what cities need, and what they need our help on individually and collectively. So Eva, to you, make the case.
All right, thanks, John. That's quite a tall order, and I think everyone else here can also pitch in on that. So one of the things that I like to talk about is in terms of systems thinking, cities as a leverage point, right? And if you've already alluded to it, Gary, that most people are living in cities currently, and that number is going to go up further, but also most materials in the world end up in cities. So 75% of all the materials that we extract from the earth somehow make their way to cities. So you can imagine them as these grand resource drains. And right now, that material that ends up in cities is really just a problem. It causes waste, it causes pollution, it costs money to remove. And if we start to restructure the economy toward the circular model, this material can actually become the source of huge amounts of value, the bedrock of new value chains, new green, circular, regenerative value chains, as long as we also ensure that the people who are currently excluded from the economy, currently marginalized, are actually becoming the owners of that material and of the different infrastructure systems that surround it. So one of the things that you mentioned earlier, Vivian, was that these informal waste collectors have been doing all of this work for decades and actually collecting these materials, et cetera. But the waste materials, as they're collected, if you imagine it like you have a pile of like plastic bottles or textiles, that has really low value. If you clean that and if you sort it and bale it, it starts to increase in value. And if you pellet it and turn it back into a raw material that can be put into some kind of new production system, it increases in value even further. But actually where the huge exponential jump in value occurs is when you take that from a raw material to a product. And that is actually the part of the system that's often being lost to those informal waste collectors. They get the material, they clean it, but they don't actually turn those materials into value-adding products. If you think about Rothy's shoes, right? These are these shoes that are made of like plastic bottles. One pair of those shoes goes for minimum $120. And that's like a few plastic bottles, right? Like quite a few, but anyway. So if you imagine giving people the ability to tap into that type of value creation and making sure that those value chains stay within urban context, not directly in the city, but also the peri-urban areas, and start reimagining the infrastructure of cities where you have these really green, beautiful cores where people live in clean air, and then you have these circular remanufacturing zones around those and food production zones, and where all those loops are closed at appropriate scales. This is really the type of vision that we need to get to, and how we need to actually be capturing that huge demand for development so that we're putting it into a different kind of future model of these circular regenerative cities. And there's a lot of implications from everything from housing to waste collection to traffic management in cities. So we have a lot of theory about this. So the work that we've been doing is actually helping cities take stock of where they are right now, not just from a materials standpoint, but also from a community skills, stakeholder standpoint, financial flows, and then to develop a vision of where they really want to go. So what kind of circular model really matches what they have currently, and then develop a kind of roadmap from A to B. And there's a lot of barriers that cities are facing. One of them is the huge financial barrier. This takes a lot of investment. And that's actually one of the things that we've been exploring a lot recently, is not just what amount of investment, because clearly that's something that's missing, but the type of investment. So how do you create the right types of financial vehicles that will flow to those communities in order for them to build these new value chains and the basis of these new economic models, because that's what we need to be doing. How do you direct that in a smart way? How do you identify where the biggest systemic leverage is? How do you also create the enabling environment, the safety nets, the conditions for people to be able to do this? Because it's difficult to start businesses. It's not like, oh, here's the money, start a business. It's actually really, really challenging for everyone who's ever done this. Looking at you, Gary. So I mean, it's not just about providing the capital, it's the right type of capital with the right type of support systems, the enabling conditions, the policy frameworks that support that. And so this is actually the core of what we're working on as the Circular Cities Coalition, is trying to figure out, like, what are all of those different elements that need to be in place, and how do we bring those to cities at scale so that we can really push this transformation and tackle multiple problems at once, from inequality and waste and pollution to resource management, because all of these are coming from similar root problems.
Excellent.
Did I say everything you wanted, John?
My God, yes. See, messing with you. No, but seriously, thank you for that. And I think a couple of points there. You laid out why very clearly of why cities should be a starting ground for us and why circular cities actually matter based on data and fact. Thank you for that. Two, I think the next piece is you've outlined some of the problems. One, I think the operational funding. Absolutely. I think that is one issue that we're looking to solve together as a coalition, is funding to take all these wonderful blueprints that these cities want to put in place to represent their communities, but having funding to actualize it, because most of the cities we're working with are bankrupt and they don't have the money because they're just trying to focus on day-to-day operations. And that leads us to two, which is really kind of looking at short-termerism. Because of the transition of departments and mayors and teams, there's not that stability long-term, where mayors have to hurry up and get wins to get votes. They're already thinking about their next election cycle the minute they're voted in. So how do we actually help be a beacon to solve their problems and get more votes? I think that's one thing to think about. And then three, multi-sector collaboration. And I want to stop there for a second, because Peter, I'm going to come to you on this, on cities. Many times in cities that we see we're working with, it's hard to get the private sector involved, and it's hard work to get the local community involved. Somebody asked a question, what examples of inclusive circular cities are in play right now? I mean, I want to highlight the work being done in Cleveland with Divya Streeter and Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, and Kathy Len on the sustainability team. They've actually tackled the idea of developing brand ambassadors, getting out into the hardest hit communities in Cleveland and bringing them to the table. And while that may not say much, they're doing a great job of listening to them, engaging with them, and building the strategy which Metabolic and Pixar Global are providing on ideas of how to be circular. And I think where cities can start on inclusivity is just authentically engaging those community members and listening to them about their pain, their sorrow, their hurt, and just engaging people in a positive and real way. And so, Peter, speaking of engaging people in a positive, real way, you're in a lot of cities right now in North America trying to engage cities on the energy transition. What are some of the things that you see in cities that give you hope from your lens? And what are some things you see to work on? And Viv, I'm coming to you after this.
I want to highlight actually something from another inclusive circular city symposium that had both Reapley and Pixera and NL, which took place yesterday. And one of my colleagues, who is in our public policy and institutional affairs group, was talking about our e-city initiative in Malaga, Spain. And he said, this was an example of a sort of holy trinity of public-private partnerships and working with the community, and how when those organizations all came together, we were able to look at biodiversity gains and sharing models, and we launched a circular economy academy there. And then Gary's colleague Gar chimed in and said, I have to respectfully disagree from a North America perspective, because here the manufacturers look to government and say we need regulations, and then government, what they do is they hand down curbside recycling to the community, and then they say, okay, that's it, problem solved, right? And that's certainly not the case. And so what we do, by comparison, what NL likes to do is first listen, right? We have to listen and we have to empathize with those communities. And I've had a lot of conversations about electrification of transportation this week. And we know, through our experience, that electrifying fleets will foster local adoption. And that's going to improve air quality in low middle income areas within the city. But then you also have to look at new business models. For example, we have a partner, EV Match, which allows you to sign up your EV charging station as a sharing platform, because we know that accessibility is an issue in cities. You're not going to get people to drive EVs if they don't have a car they can park it in and charge it, or curbside charging. And happy to say that I know Plant Chicago is a friend of all of ours. They were the first public EV charging station, which was an NLX charger with EV Match in the back of the yards neighborhood. And so what you start to see is this prosumer model of now those people that didn't previously have accessibility to renewables and things like that are now able to generate a little bit of income for them, and then share that and spread the love, right? And so with distributed energy resources, we can have renewables generated with battery storage, which adds resiliency, and there's equity plays because you can also lower your energy costs. And so it is a systems type approach that we have to look at. And for us in the energy sector, that's not just the electricity coming through your outlet in the wall. It's your transportation, it's your neighborhood, and it's all the associated infrastructure that you have to develop.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that, Peter. I mean, it's a lot, right? And thank you for the comments. I mean, it's not easy. Really good examples, and also thank you for the North America piece. I think what I want to do now, because I want to be mindful of time, and I think we could go for another hour, is I want to wrap up the need of the cities and get into a little bit about collaboration and actions that respectively all of us can do to help spur this transition and get insights from every single one of these people of their thoughts on partnership and why they've actually kind of come to the coalition here. So Viv, first of all, I want to talk to you, because partnership is always subjective. And what advice can you give folks on the call where people can go take action? What can people do as far as partnership to actually lead inclusive and regenerative ecosystems? Any insights that you can provide would be great. And then Gary, I'm going to come to you, and Ava and Peter.
Yeah, I'll just say first and foremost, I am just been soaking up so much of what everybody is saying here today. And I think that is just a true key to a strong partnership. Bringing to the table folks that have very different expertise to offer, and very specific expertise to offer as well. I think, when we're looking at the work that we do in a place like Haiti, where the need is everywhere and the need is varied, we recognize from day one that we can't do everything ourselves, nor will we have the expertise to do everything ourselves. So how can we truly create partnerships where, where we respect and acknowledge everybody's space, where we can acknowledge that space in honor of the people we're trying to serve, and in service of the people we're trying to serve as well. So, I think first and foremost is understanding what the needs are holistically, and don't be afraid to do that, right? I think, a lot of times we find ourselves tiptoeing around trying to unveil all of the challenges, because if there are too many challenges, it gets overwhelming. It is overwhelming. This is an overwhelming topic, but know that there are really, really good and wonderful wonderful people out there doing very specific things to solve each and every level of that work, of that challenge, right? And so I think, first and foremost, don't be afraid to unveil those challenges. And then secondly, be very clear of what you can do, of what your expertise is, right? And acknowledge the fact that you can use help in other ways, and then bring just the most wonderful people like we have here in this panel together to help solve that challenge.
Thank you, Vivian. And thank you so much for your partnership and the great work that you continue to do around the world and making the world a better place. Thank you. Gary, I want to come to you on this one too, because I know partnership is really meaningful to you. Can you give some insights and thoughts to this question?
Yes. So I don't think we get anywhere without partnerships and collaboration. Like, just hands down, bullet, full stop, sentences ended. I think, and that partnership is not just between Reaply and a friend, Reaply and a data provider. It is partnerships with people who are in competition with each other right now in the market. The textile producers need to be partnered together. Apple and Google and Microsoft and Dell, they need to be partnered together. What we have to do as a working community is understand that all of this whole system affects us all. So if we're all not trying to change it together, we get really nowhere. So we, Reaply, launched a partnership program about a couple of weeks ago. I've actually just put the link in the chat here. It's a free partnership. So all we're saying is come sign up, and if Reaply is in your community, we would love to invite you to the platform so material can either flow from your organization or to an organization. And so we can kind of keep things out of landfill. So we're trying to do our part as a small startup, but I think more generally, we all have to be looking in the mirrors and saying, like, the folks who we sit next to are our friends in this fight. They aren't our competition. We should all be trying to figure out how we partner more.
Yeah, the human element, right? And to find organizations and people that have like-minded points of view and want to go in that direction and can back you up on where you want to go. Eva, let's come to you a little bit on this one. So what's your thoughts on this one, and also maybe specifically related to cities in the coalition here?
Yeah, so on partnerships in general, it was a few years ago, I think like 4 years ago at this point, looking toward, the transition 20s, that we have this annual strategy retreat every year. And I was on this retreat and I realized there is no way, even if someone handed us a bag of like $10 trillion, that we would be able to grow fast enough, bring in enough knowledge to execute what is needed on our own. Actually, the only way forward to move as quickly as we can is to get everyone doing, everyone active in these solutions. And in fact, actually, if like there's still this sense of like ego of like trying to be the one to save the world, even in the kind of nonprofit space. And if that's the case, and if people are recognizing you as the one who brought the solution, then you're doing it wrong, because we need to get to the point where it's replicating so quickly and it's so ubiquitous that you don't even know where it originated. So, and I think that that's kind of the mentality that we need to be embodying, this egoless sense of like, we all need to get going on this together as quickly as possible. Now there
Ava, I want to transition there. Hold on, because you brought up a really good point. We're having this conversation and we said, well, let's get this coalition up and running and let's bring these solutions to market. And we said, somebody said, well, who's your competition? I remember you and I going, there's no competition. If we have competition, we want everybody to take it and go with it. This has nothing to do with competition. It's trying to scale and grow. And I think that really shares really well on how you think and how we work together. Sorry, I just want to bring that up though, because I remember that conversation and going, there's no competition here. Sorry, go ahead.
For sure. And I think that this is like a shift, like a paradigm shift that a lot of people, even in this space, need to, we need to be promoting this kind of paradigm shift. People need to stop being scared of like losing their own, credit or cash or whatever. So yeah, and I mean, with cities in particular, because it's such a complex, multifaceted thing, and also because you have different contexts, there's no way that we can support cities and transitions toward the circular regenerative model without deeply and fundamentally engaging local communities in every area. Like, they have to own it and they have to do it themselves, because we are never even not talking about like transnational or like north-south, advice that where it's definitely like neo-colonial, but even within the United States, like you can't go from one state to another state and say like, oh, well, we know what to do here because we did it in New York or we did whatever. So like you really have to create these systems of genuinely transferring knowledge and genuinely getting people to be owners of the solution and the solution space. And that's why it's so critical. So I think what we're trying to do with the coalition now is to model a way of working together and figure out how we can create these replication mechanisms and build those incentives so that all of this transmits as quickly as possible.
Amen. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. You make a really good point about the United States. It's actually really, really harrowing when I walk around the Supreme Court, which is 10 minutes away, and I see stuff from 1970 right in front of my face, and you wonder how we're divided again. Peter, I want to come to you on partnership, something aspirational here. With NL, we see a lot of the work that you do in the space globally. We've now worked with your whole office and getting them involved with this, and there's a seamless relationship there. What does partnership look like for you, and especially in the context of this coalition?
Well, I think, for NL broadly, one thing that I love to point out is that I am but one of hundreds of full-time sustainability professionals, and we have an entire group of people that look at sustainability ecosystems, and that's because we can't do it on our own, and we can't do it in a silo. It's not just within the energy industry; it's that value chain, upstream, tiered suppliers, et cetera, else. But it's the communities where we operate ultimately that make the biggest difference. And so we work very closely with academia, and that has a beneficial relationship because we need to train people for the energy transition. We need to train people for circularity. And
Yes.
no longer we simplified our hiring applications to take 5 minutes to complete, because not everybody needs a bachelor's degree or a master's degree to be able to do something. And we like to work with technical colleges and things like that. But also innovation and sustainability walk hand in hand for now. And so we are constantly working with startups and incubators and labs to try to scale their solutions, because as I think Gary, Eva, everybody has said, nobody has the answer or solution. So we have to work together, and we want to provide the backing of a machine like NL to help scale those solutions if they really are solving a problem. And so for us, it's critical. Every day I'm working across industries, but it really does start with the communities where we operate. And like I said, listening and understanding what their needs are so that we can address those together.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. Well, I can't believe it, but we're making good pace. We got 8 minutes left, and I want to get to some Q&A here. Wow. Thank you for all the pace, and thank you everyone for staying on. I see a lot of you still holding on tight. So I promise to get to some questions here. I can't get them all, but it's only fair that we're having systems change conversations to have questions that make our head blow up too. So everyone, and I think I'm going to start here with Mr. Cooper. Mr. Cooper, in your humble opinion, what is the lower hanging fruit to push circular economy in the US? Is it social behavior change? Is it policy change top down? Or is it pure capitalism evolution? And I am curious to get this one because mindset. Gary, help us out here.
Lowest hanging fruit in the United States right now to create circular change. For sure, I think it has to be like top-down leadership from a government actor. I think that's the lowest, the biggest bang for the buck. I think to expect the Fortune 100 to all of a sudden change overnight or to be completely circular overnight is a dream. I work with those folks; they're my favorite folks. But that's it. There is a transition going on. But if we could change the green premium that exists with buying virgin material, if we could change how we think about recycling, if we could change our tax structure to thinking about if we're building things with recycled materials, whether that's in the built environment space, whether it's in the consumer product space, how can we incentivize businesses to do that more? The government can do that. And like that, like in Europe, like that, things would start to change a little bit more for the United States. So I say it's on the administration. And by the way, I should share that this morning that the administration announced for the first time ever, the Office of Environmental Justice at the Department of Justice. So they're now staffing an entire department within the Department of Justice to provide the back end to people going against policy. So now the emphasis is let's create policy.
That's excellent. I think really good aspirational change there. And I think it's a good start. And, you know, I also want to highlight though one other piece. The United States government's allocated $43 billion to fight climate change. There's a gentleman looking to buy Twitter for $45 billion. So also maybe a start is making things equitable across the way where we're putting where our money or our mouth is on policy a little bit and have those hard conversations with our legislatures. But this is a great start, Gary, and thank you for highlighting that. I don't want to take all the air out of that, but you brought up a really good point there on environmental justice. Eva, I'm going to go to you, but I think one thing also is mindset. And I know a lot of talk, I love when I met Metabolic was, John, all this talk is great, but mindset shift broadly has to change. So I'm not setting up that you have to answer that question, but I just want to highlight that you always bring up mindset and it just stuck in my head for the past 2 years. On that note, what is the low hanging fruit though? Because you can't change everybody's mind at the flip of thumb unless something happened to Fox. Sorry, but what does that look like for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and we're very actively chewing on this. So I agree that Gary didn't answer that was the low-hanging fruit, because mindset transition is really difficult, right? So it's really about the bang for your buck. And related to what Gary mentioned about policy, I'm going to be speaking at Circularity 22 as well on a panel about European policy and how it's driving change across more broadly across the world on circularity. But the mindset shift piece, so I've actually been doing a lot of reading and thinking. We actually set up like an internal team. We have a mindset transition lead now that's been appointed within Metabolic, actually 2. And we're trying to figure out our strategy around this, because you can say, okay, well, who are the people in the positions of the most influence? Because if you want to change everybody's mind, then you need to have like mass media capabilities. And that's difficult, especially in this, I mean, that's challenging to organize, and there's so much disinformation. You can imagine creating some really compelling narratives like Harry Potter style that capture everyone's imagination about what a circular regenerative future could look like. And, you know, it's the hottest thing on TikTok, next thing you know. But that, but I think like there's ways to really do it in a more targeted fashion, to find the kind of influencers, business leaders, the people who actually do control policy and try to figure out how to change their minds and create aha moments and moments of awakening. There's organizations that do this kind of leadership training where they try to develop people internally. And I think within organizations, the key thing is to, if you notice that you're working in an organization where the leadership doesn't have the right kind of mindset, figure out what you can do to get their minds changed, right? So to expose them to different types of information, to have them have those realizations. Kids are really powerful at changing the minds of their parents. Like there's all sorts of tools and things that you can try to figure out how to use. And there's also a critical mass piece. Like once there's a critical consensus within society of like 10% of people believing something, or then it starts to really trickle through. So how do you find the kind of mouthpieces, the amplifiers? And, you know, so anyway, I could get really like technical and dorky about this, but I think it's so powerful and it's so critical, but I don't think we've cracked it yet is the point. And I think we're trying to figure out like, okay, what can we do to crack it better?
Yeah, absolutely. And we got speed dating now. It's 12:15, but a couple of points on that one real quickly. All of us on this call, when we talk about mindset, when we work with those private sector companies, when you look at the gatekeepers, the chief of sustainability department members, work with them, help them succeed, help them say, listen, this is great. Where's your regenerative business plan transition? You know, Gary, we talk a lot about teaching and at BARD and the great work they're doing on circular value chain and getting in front of people going, no, 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 no. You're not going to design out waste by recycling. Can you think of it in the very beginning? I think all of us have a collective job to do on this call of working with your clients and working with your customers and working with the people that pay you to make their bar be high. Help them help you, right? I think that's always key. Vivian, I want to give you a quick 30, 45-second club of just one thing you think, and then we can close this one off.
You're on mute, Vivian.
Thank you. I want to just build on what Eva, you were just saying, and about training and development as well. You know, one of the things that we're starting to do, and we've been doing with the help of support of HP, one of our brand partners, is to think about how do we not just end child labor at the very first mile of supply chains, but think about how to include them in the work that we do in the future, right? So, you know, our kids that we have put back into school are now becoming engineers and working with us to rethink what inclusive systems could look like in our communities, right? How can we retrain people for skill sets for the jobs that are there tomorrow? How can we ensure that we're not just helping them collect more material or do more of what they're doing today, but really allow them to enter the systems that we're building tomorrow. So I will leave it at that.
Thank you, Viv. That's a tough one, Peter. Last points, and then I think just
Real quick, I saw a question in the Q&A. What do we think about putting a price on carbon? Yes, please. We have to start to internalize negative externalities, and we can do that through policy. Do I think that's low hanging fruit and easy to do? No, but absolutely, it's what we have to do.
excellent. Well, listen, the time is up. Thank you all, friends and colleagues, for the time. And it's always great having these conversations. And the audience, please feel free to put your questions down. We will get back to you again. On May 18th, we are launching the Circular City Coalition in partnership with Metabolic, NL, Reaply, First Mile, and Pixera Global. Come join us on leading this regenerative and inclusive transition in the cities that we're working in. Love to have a conversation with you. Thank you all. Have a great day. And again, panelists, you rock. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks again,
Thank
John.
you.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.